High Admiral Zexkar clicked his mandibles in satisfaction as he reviewed the surveillance reports from Sector 7739. The small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star had finally caught the Confederation's attention, and not in a good way. "These humans are becoming troublesome," he muttered to his aide, a thin-limbed Vortakian named Chill. "Look at this data. 50 years ago, they barely had chemical rockets. Now they have fusion drives and orbital shipyards." Kill's large eyes blinked rapidly as he scanned the holographic display. The progression was indeed alarming. The humans had gone from splitting atoms to building crude starships in less than a century. By galactic standards, this was impossibly fast. "Should we classify them as a potential threat, Admiral?" Kill asked. Zexkar's laugh was a harsh, buzzing sound. "Threat? These primitives? They haven't even left their home system yet. No, Kill. This is simply a case of uncontrolled development. Like a virus that spreads too quickly for its own good. The Galactic Confederation had ruled over 3,000 star systems for nearly 10,000 years. They had seen species like humanity before, young races that showed promise but lacked wisdom. The secret to galactic peace was simple. Keep everyone at roughly the same technological level, advanced enough to contribute to the Confederation, but not advanced enough to challenge it. "What do our xenobiologists say about their psychology?" Zexkar asked. Kill brought up another file. "Standard mammalian aggression patterns, but within acceptable ranges. They fight among themselves frequently, which actually makes them easier to manage. Their governments are fragmented, no unified planetary authority. The analysis suggests they would submit to Confederation oversight within a standard year if properly motivated. Motivated. Zexkar savored the word. The Confederation had many ways to motivate unruly species. Economic pressure usually worked. Technological restrictions were effective too. But sometimes a more direct approach was needed. He studied the tactical display showing Earth's orbital infrastructure. 3 large space stations, dozens of smaller ones, and nearly 100 ships of various sizes. It wasn't much by Confederation standards, but it represented decades of human effort and trillions of their primitive currency units. "How many ships would we need to disable their space capabilities?" he asked his tactical officer, a 4-armed Nexilian called Torv. Torv's multiple hands danced over his console. 6 destroyers would be sufficient, Admiral. Their weapons are crude kinetic projectiles and early-stage energy beams. Our shields could handle their entire fleet simultaneously. And casualties? Minimal on our side. As for the humans, Torv paused. The orbital stations are heavily populated. Civilian workers, their families. The shipyards employ several 100,000 individuals. If we target the infrastructure directly, I didn't ask for a moral evaluation, Torv. I asked for numbers. Estimated human casualties would be between 50 and 70,000, depending on shift rotations and evacuation procedures. Zexkar nodded approvingly. It was a significant number for the humans, but negligible by galactic standards. The Confederation had suppressed species before. Sometimes you had to break a few eggs to maintain order. "What's our justification?" Kill asked. "Even routine operations required proper documentation, uncontrolled technological development posing a potential threat to regional stability," Zexkar replied without hesitation. "Standard Form 77B. File it under preventive maintenance." The irony wasn't lost on him. The humans had no idea they were being watched. They certainly had no idea their rapid progress had been deemed unacceptable by a galactic government they didn't even know existed. They were about to be punished for the crime of being too successful too quickly. 3 days later, Admiral Zexkar stood on the bridge of the Confederation destroyer Righteous Purpose as it dropped out of hyperspace, at the edge of the Sol system. 5 other destroyers materialized alongside his flagship, their sleek forms designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. "Begin the operation," he commanded. The attack was swift and clinical. The destroyers moved through space like predators, among sheep. Human sensor arrays designed to watch for asteroids and comets were completely blind to Confederation stealth technology. The orbital stations never saw death approaching. The first target was Luna Station, humanity's pride and joy. The massive rotating wheel housed nearly 30,000 people and served as the primary construction facility for their interstellar vessels. Zexkar watched impassively as concentrated plasma beams reduced it to expanding clouds of vapor and debris. Mars Orbital followed moments later. The smaller facility exploded in a brilliant flash that briefly outshone the red planet below. Emergency broadcasts filled human communication channels as panicked voices tried to understand what was happening. "Sir," Torv reported, "the humans are launching their defensive fleet." On the tactical display, dozens of human ships were accelerating toward the destroyers. Their largest vessel was barely the size of a Confederation corvette, and their weapons were laughably primitive. But they came anyway, like insects attacking a flame. "How quaint," Zexkar observed. "They think they can fight us." The human fleet lasted 18 minutes. Their ships were well built for their technology level, and their crews showed admirable courage. But courage couldn't overcome the fundamental laws of physics. Confederation shields absorbed their attacks effortlessly, while return fire carved through human vessels like a blade through tissue. The final target was Earth Orbital 1, the oldest and largest of humanity's space stations. Home to 40,000 people. It served as both a gateway to space and a symbol of human achievement. Zexkar permitted himself a moment of satisfaction as it joined its sister stations in destruction. "Mission accomplished, Admiral," Torv reported. "All primary targets destroyed. Human space capability reduced by approximately 87%. Excellent. Signal the fleet to withdraw." As the destroyers prepared to enter hyperspace, Zexkar took one last look at the blue-white planet hanging in the void. Radio transmissions from its surface painted a picture of chaos and confusion. World leaders demanding answers, military forces on highest alert, scientists frantically trying to analyze the debris for clues about their attackers. "Admiral," Kill said quietly. "What? If they attempt retaliation?" Zexkar's mandibles clicked in amusement. "With what? We just destroyed their space fleet. It will take them decades to rebuild, assuming they ever do. More likely, this demonstration will convince them to abandon their expansion efforts entirely." Destroyers vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only wreckage and questions. In the Confederation capital, the operation would be filed away as a minor success. Another primitive species properly educated about their place in the galactic order. Zexkar had no way of knowing that he had just made the worst mistake in the Confederation's 10,000-year history. He couldn't have imagined that instead of crushing human ambition, he had given it focus. The scattered competitive nations of Earth were about to discover they had something far more dangerous than individual nationalism. They were about to discover they were human, and being human, it turned out, meant something very different than the Confederation's databases suggested. President Sarah Chen stood in the emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, her hands trembling slightly as she held the preliminary analysis report. Around the circular table, the faces of world leaders reflected the same mixture of shock, anger, and determination that had consumed her for the past 72 hours. "The debris analysis is conclusive," she announced to the silent room. "The weapons that destroyed our orbital stations use technology we don't understand. Energy projection systems that operate on principles we haven't even theorized yet. Hull, materials with molecular structures that shouldn't be possible." Prime Minister Viktor Petrov of the Russian Federation leaned forward. "What are you saying, Madam President, that we were attacked by aliens?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Chen's voice was steady now, the initial shock replaced by cold resolve. The wreckage contains isotopes that don't exist naturally in our solar system. The attack patterns were too coordinated for any known technology. And the precision... She paused, looking at each leader in turn. They hit exactly what they wanted. To hit. No more, no less. Chancellor Emma Richter of the European Union spoke up. The death toll stands at 68,000 confirmed, with another 12,000 missing and presumed dead. These aliens, they murdered 80,000 human beings without warning, without provocation, without even announcing their presence. The Chinese premier, Liu Wei, was studying a tablet with grim concentration. Our military analysts have reached the same conclusion. This was not an invasion. It was a demonstration. They wanted to cripple our space capabilities while leaving our planet intact. But why? Asked President Amara Okafor of the African Federation. What could we have possibly done to provoke such an attack? Dr. James Morrison, the head of NASA, cleared his throat. If I may, world leaders, I believe I know why. All eyes turned to the elderly scientist. In the past 50 years, humanity has made unprecedented leaps in space technology. We've gone from chemical rockets to fusion drives, from metal hulls to metamaterial composites, from single-planet habitation to building true starships. So maybe someone out there doesn't want us to advance that quickly. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. General Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was the first to speak. You're suggesting they attacked us to keep us primitive. I'm suggesting they attacked us because we were becoming less primitive, Morrison replied. And that means one very important thing. They're afraid of what we might become. President Chen stood up slowly. Then we need to become exactly what they're afraid of. The next 6 hours changed the course of human history. Traditional national boundaries dissolved as leaders hammered out the framework for something unprecedented. A unified global government with a single purpose. The Earth Defense Authority was born not from idealism, but from necessity. Within a week, the most brilliant minds from every nation were working together in underground facilities that had been built in secret during the Cold War. Scientists who had spent their careers competing for funding and recognition now shared everything freely. Engineers who had been developing weapons to use against each other turned their skills toward a common enemy. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a materials scientist from Tokyo, found herself working alongside Dr. Roberto Silva from São Paulo and Dr. Aisha Patel from Mumbai. 3 months earlier, they had been strangers. Now they were part of a team racing to understand alien technology. The hull fragments are incredible, Tanaka explained as she manipulated a holographic display. The atomic structure adjusts dynamically to incoming forces. It's not just armor, it's adaptive armor. Silva nodded excitedly. And look at this energy residue from their weapons. It's not plasma, it's not lasers. It's something that converts matter directly into energy at the point of impact. But the conversion is controlled, targeted, which means it can be replicated. Patel added, given enough time and resources. Time and resources were exactly what humanity had decided to provide. The global economy restructured itself almost overnight. Consumer goods became secondary priorities. Entertainment industries pivoted to supporting the war effort. Every government's primary budget item became a single line, species survival. In Detroit, General Motors retooled their factories to produce spacecraft components. In Seoul, Samsung's semiconductor facilities began working around the clock to develop new computing systems. In Mumbai, pharmaceutical companies shifted their research toward life support systems for long-duration space travel. But the most significant changes were happening in places the aliens couldn't see. Deep underground, humanity was building something that had never existed before. Industrial facilities designed to operate in absolute secrecy. Mile-long manufacturing complexes buried beneath mountains. Shipyards carved out of solid rock. Research laboratories that could survive nuclear attacks. "We have to assume they're watching," General Hayes explained to her staff. "Everything we do on the surface, everything they can detect from orbit has to look normal. Broken, defeated. The real work happens where they can't see it." The strategy was working. Satellite imagery showed human governments struggling to rebuild their shattered space program. Public broadcasts were filled with calls for international aid and cooperation to address the asteroid impact that had destroyed the orbital stations. The official story was holding, at least for now. Underground, the truth was very different. Captain Maria Santos stood in the cavernous Assembly Bay 7, watching as the first prototype of humanity's new starship took shape. It didn't look like anything humans had built before. The design incorporated reverse-engineered alien technology with human engineering principles that the aliens had apparently never considered. "How long until it's operational?" asked Dr. Chen, who had transitioned from president to director of Advanced Projects. 6 months for this prototype," Santos replied. "But we're building 27 of them simultaneously. Different designs, different approaches. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket." The ship before them was sleek and predatory, nothing like the bulky industrial vessels humanity had been building just months before. Its hull incorporated the adaptive materials they'd learned from alien wreckage. Its weapons were based on energy conversion principles that human physicists were only beginning to understand. But the most important innovation was invisible. Hidden throughout the ship were communication systems, sensor arrays, and data storage units that would allow it to share everything it learned with every other human vessel. The aliens had attacked humanity's space infrastructure, but they had also inadvertently given humanity something far more valuable, a reason to unite. "There's something else," Santos continued. "The psychological profiles of our volunteer crews are interesting. These people aren't motivated by exploration or scientific curiosity. They're motivated by something much more basic, which is revenge, Doctor." Chen nodded grimly. She had read the same reports. The crews volunteering for the most dangerous missions weren't professional soldiers or trained astronauts. They were civilian engineers who had lost family members in the orbital attacks. Scientists whose life's work had been vaporized in an instant. Ordinary people who had been transformed by the simple knowledge that someone out there considered human life expendable. "That's not necessarily a bad thing," she said. "Revenge is a powerful motivator, and unlike fear or anger, it doesn't fade with time. If anything, it grows stronger." As they spoke, similar scenes were playing out in facilities around the world. In the Urals, Russian engineers were developing new propulsion systems. In the Australian outback, joint teams were building advanced sensor arrays. In the Amazon rainforest, vast underground farms were being established to support long-duration space missions. Humanity was preparing for war, not the kind of war they had known throughout their history, limited conflicts over territory or resources. This was something different. This was a war for the right to exist as a spacefaring species. The aliens had made a calculation that a sharp, decisive blow would convince humanity to abandon their expansion into space. They had based this calculation on their understanding of primitive species that could be intimidated by superior technology. They had not accounted for one crucial factor: humanity's relationship with extinction. Other species, when faced with an existential threat, would submit or flee. Humans, when faced with extinction, became something else entirely. They became predators. Admiral Zexkar was reviewing routine patrol reports when his aide Kill burst into his office without announcement. The Vortakian's normally pale skin had turned an alarming shade of green. "Admiral, we have a problem. A big problem." Zexkar looked up from his data pad with irritation. "What could possibly be so urgent that you forget basic protocol?" "It's the humans, sir. They're not supposed to be doing this." Kill activated the office's holographic display, showing a tactical, map of Confederation space. Red markers indicated the locations of recent incidents, and there were far too many of them. 15 supply convoys attacked in the past 2 months, Kill reported, his voice shaking. 4 mining operations completely destroyed. 3 slave processing facilities liberated. And sir, none of our ships have been able to catch them. Zexkar stared at the display in disbelief. That's impossible. We destroyed their space capability 18 months ago. Our surveillance shows they're still struggling to rebuild basic orbital infrastructure. That's what we thought too, sir. But look at this. The display shifted to show security footage from the attack on mining station Helix 7. Zexkar watched as sleek, predatory ships emerged from what appeared to be empty space. They moved with an efficiency he had never seen before, striking specific targets with surgical precision before vanishing again. How many ships? He asked. Unknown, sir. They appear, attack, and disappear. Our sensor arrays can't track them once they engage some kind of stealth system. But Admiral... Kill paused. The ships don't look human. What do you mean? I mean they're using our technology, hull materials that match our specifications, energy weapons based on our designs. But the engineering is different. Better. Zexkar felt his mandibles clicking involuntarily, a sign of stress he hadn't experienced in decades. Show me the weapon signatures. The next series of displays made his situation clear. The mysterious attackers were using energy conversion weapons that operated on the same principles as Confederation technology, but with improvements that shouldn't have been possible. Their targeting systems were more accurate. Their power output was higher. Their efficiency was beyond anything in the Confederation's arsenal. Sir, Kill continued, there's something else. The liberated facilities. The slaves weren't just freed. They were recruited. Recruited for what? Unknown. But we've lost contact with over 300,000 beings from various species. They've simply vanished. The communication system on Zexkar's desk chimed, with an urgent priority signal. The familiar face of High Command appeared on the screen, and Zexkar could see the strain in his superior's expression. Admiral, the voice was terse and controlled. Report to Central Command immediately. We have a situation. 24 hours later, Zexkar found himself in a conference room with the highest levels of Confederation leadership. The atmosphere was tense in a way he had never experienced before. Supreme Admiral Corthon, the highest military authority in the Confederation, stood before a massive tactical display showing their entire territory. Red markers indicated recent attacks, and the pattern was becoming clear. In the past 6 months, Corthon began, we have lost more assets to unknown attackers than we lost in the entire rebellion of the Outer Rim 3 centuries ago. The attackers are systematic, intelligent, and completely invisible to our detection systems. Defense Minister Yextal, a massive Krogian whose species had never known defeat in battle, stepped forward. Our intelligence suggests these attacks are not random. The targets have been carefully chosen. Supply lines that support our expansion efforts, mining operations in contested territories, slave facilities that house our most valuable workers. And most disturbing of all, added Intelligence Director Velthara, the freed slaves are not returning to their home worlds. They are joining the attackers. Zexkar felt his stomach drop. Joining them? You mean cooperating? We mean converting, Velthara replied coldly. Every species we have civilized over the past 1,000 years is suddenly sharing intelligence about our operations, our weaknesses, our patrol routes. We are facing a coalition of every primitive species in our territory. But that's impossible, Zexkar protested. These species barely understand space travel. They have no military coordination, no unified command structure. They do now. Supreme Admiral Corthon activated a new display showing intercepted communications. The signals were encrypted with mathematical principles that Confederation computers couldn't break, but the transmission patterns told a story of their own. Coordinated fleet movements across 17 star systems, Corthon explained. resource, sharing between species that have never even met each other, joint military operations involving technologies from dozens of different civilizations. Someone is organizing them. The humans? Zexkar said quietly. The humans, Corthan confirmed. The species you assured us would be properly motivated by a simple demonstration of superior force. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The Confederation had spent millennia maintaining control through a simple strategy. Keep potential enemies divided and primitive. Never allow them to unite. Never let them share technology. Never give them a reason to cooperate. The attack on Earth had accomplished the exact opposite of its intended goal. What do we know about their capabilities? Asked Defense Minister Yextal. Intelligence Director Velthara brought up a new series of reports. Based on debris analysis from the few engagements where we've inflicted damage, they've somehow reverse-engineered our technology and improved upon it. Their ships are faster, more maneuverable, and more heavily armed than anything in our fleet. How is that possible? Zexkar demanded. We gave them a few hull fragments and weapon residue. That's not enough to rebuild an entire technology base. Unless, Velthara said slowly, they didn't start from fragments. Unless they started from intact systems. The horrible realization hit everyone in the room simultaneously. The humans hadn't just analyzed the wreckage from their destroyed stations. They had salvaged intact technology from the attack itself. The weapon systems, Zexkar whispered. When we destroyed their stations, some of our energy beams passed through the structures without fully dissipating. The humans could have captured and analyzed the beam generators themselves. And the hull fragments contained complete molecular matrices, added Yextal. They didn't just learn what our materials were made of, they learned how to make them. Supreme Admiral Corthan turned to face the assembled leadership. We are dealing with a species that views warfare differently than any we have encountered. They don't fight for territory or resources. They don't seek to conquer or subjugate. They fight for extinction or survival with no middle ground. What do you recommend? Asked the defense minister. Total war. Immediate mobilization of the entire Confederation fleet. We end this before it spreads further. And if we fail? Corthan's expression was grim. Then we will have created the very thing our ancestors feared most when they founded the Confederation, a species capable of uniting the galaxy against us. As the meeting continued, none of the Confederation leaders noticed the small probe maintaining position just outside their detection range. The device was so advanced that it appeared to be nothing more than a piece of space debris, indistinguishable from the thousands of asteroids that drifted through the system. But deep inside its hull, sophisticated recording equipment was capturing every word, every tactical display, every strategic plan. The probe's quantum communication system transmitted this intelligence instantaneously across hundreds of light years to a hidden facility in the asteroid belt of an unremarkable star system. There, human analysts studied the Confederation's plans, with the same methodical precision their ancestors had once used to hunt mammoths. They were learning their enemies' weaknesses, their fears, their decision-making processes. The Confederation thought they were dealing with a primitive species that had stumbled onto advanced technology. They had no idea they were being systematically studied, analyzed, and outmaneuvered by creatures who had spent their entire evolutionary history becoming the most dangerous predators their planet had ever produced. The hunt was no longer just beginning. The hunt was already over. The Confederation just didn't know they were the prey yet. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as her tactical display showed the systematic dismantling of Confederation Outpost Gamma 9. Around her, the crew worked with the silent efficiency that had become humanity's. Trademark. No celebration, no excitement, just cold professional destruction. Target their communication array first, she ordered. Standard protocol. The Retribution's energy weapons lanced out with surgical precision, severing the outpost's connection to the Confederation fleet. This had become humanity's signature, Move, isolate, disable, extract intelligence, then vanish. The Confederation never got warnings anymore. Their reinforcements always arrived to find empty space and scattered debris. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Chen from the sensor station, "we're detecting 1,700 life forms aboard the station. Mixed species. Looks like standard slave labor composition. Begin liberation protocols. Within minutes, smaller human." Vessels were docking with the Confederation outpost. These weren't military ships. They were purpose-built rescue and conversion platforms. Each one carried medical teams, translators, and most importantly, representatives from every species humanity had encountered. This was the strategy that had transformed the war from a simple conflict between two species into something far more dangerous for the Confederation. Every liberated slave became a teacher, sharing the weaknesses and secrets of their former masters. Every rescued species became a recruiting ground for the growing coalition. "Captain," reported the communications. "Officer, we're receiving surrender signals from the station commander." "Standard response," Vasquez replied without emotion. The standard response had been developed by human psychologists working with alien refugees. It was carefully designed to maximize the psychological impact on Confederation forces. The message was always the same, delivered in perfect Confederation standard. "This is the Human Liberation Fleet. Your facility has been designated for freedom operations. Surrender your weapons and prepare for processing. Resistance will be met with proportional force. You have 10 minutes to comply." What made the message so effective wasn't its content. It was its tone. Cold, professional, inevitable. The CO. Confederation had spent millennia projecting exactly this kind of authority over primitive species. Having it used against them was psychologically devastating. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen continued, "long-range sensors are detecting a Confederation response fleet. 12 destroyers, ETA 43 minutes. More than enough time." Vasquez turned to her executive officer. "Commander Park, begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was the part of human operations that the Confederation still didn't understand. Instead of fleeing before reinforcements arrived, the humans would often stay and fight. But they didn't fight like any military force the Confederation had ever encountered. Human ships would split into small groups and attack from multiple directions simultaneously. They would target specific systems with devastating precision: life support, navigation, weapons, leaving Confederation vessels crippled but not destroyed. The crews would then be forced to watch as human boarding parties took their ships, apart piece by piece. It wasn't just military tactics, it was psychological warfare designed to break the enemy's will to fight. "Ma'am, liberation teams report complete success. All slaves have been extracted and are requesting asylum with our fleet." "Granted. Signal the convoy to prepare for hyperspace." But today was different. Today, Captain Vasquez had additional orders that came directly from the human high command. Today, they weren't just liberating slaves and gathering intelligence. Today, they were sending a message. "Sir, the Confederation response fleet has arrived," reported Lieutenant Chen. "They're hailing us. Put them through." The main screen activated, showing the familiar form of a Confederation admiral. His mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation that human intelligence had learned to recognize. "Unknown vessels!" The admiral's voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. "You are in violation of Confederation space. Withdraw immediately or face destruction." Captain Vasquez smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Admiral, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Human Liberation Fleet. We have completed our operations here. You are free to recover your outpost." "Human?" The Admiral's eyes widened. "Impossible. We destroyed your space capability years ago." "You destroyed some orbital stations," Vasquez corrected. "You also murdered 80,000 civilians." "We remember." The transmission ended, and the human fleet began its departure. But instead of the quick hyperspace jump the Confederation expected, something different happened. "Ma'am," reported the tactical officer, "all ships are reporting ready for demonstration protocol." Vasquez nodded. The demonstration protocol had been developed specifically for moments like this. The Confederation needed to understand that their technological superiority was no longer guaranteed. Execute. What happened next would be analyzed by Confederation military strategists for months afterward. The human fleet didn't flee. Instead, they turned and engaged the Confederation destroyers in direct combat. But this wasn't the desperate last stand the Admiral expected. It was a carefully choreographed display of overwhelming technological superiority. Human ships moved through space like dancers, their adaptive hulls shifting to deflect incoming fire, while their weapons carved through Confederation shields as if they didn't exist. Energy beams that should have destroyed human vessels were absorbed and redirected. Missiles that should have crippled their engines were intercepted by defensive systems that operated faster than Confederation targeting. Computers could track. In 18 minutes, 12 Confederation destroyers were reduced to drifting hulks. Their crews were alive but helpless, watching as human ships systematically dismantled their vessels for salvage. "Admiral," Captain Vasquez's voice came over the emergency communication channel, "tell your superiors that we are no longer the species you attacked 3 years ago. Tell them that every day they continue their oppression of other species, we become stronger. Tell them that we have united every race you have ever enslaved, and we are teaching them what freedom means." The Admiral stared at his tactical display in shock. His entire fleet had been neutralized without a single human casualty. What do you want?" "We want you to remember this moment," Vasquez replied. "We want you to understand that humanity doesn't forget, we don't forgive, and we don't stop." The human fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind wreckage and a message that would spread throughout Confederation space faster than any official communication. Humanity was no longer hiding. 3 months later, the effects of the new human strategy were becoming clear throughout Confederation territory. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were openly rebelling. Entire star systems were declaring independence. The carefully maintained balance of power that had kept the Confederation stable for millennia was collapsing. Supreme Admiral Corthan stood in the Central Command reviewing reports that grew worse each day. The humans weren't just fighting a war, they were systematically dismantling the foundation of Confederation society. "The economic projections are catastrophic," reported his aide. 16 major industrial systems have gone offline. Our supply chains are collapsing. The slave labor force that supports our infrastructure is either freed or in active rebellion. What about our fleet response? Ineffective, sir. Every engagement with human forces results in either heavy casualties or complete defeat. Our shipyards can't replace vessels fast enough to match our losses. Corthan studied the strategic display with growing dread. The red markers indicating human activity now covered nearly a third of Confederation space, but worse than the territorial losses was what the intelligence reports revealed about human capabilities. "They're not just winning battles," he said quietly. "They're learning from every engagement. Every ship we lose, every tactic we employ, every technological advantage we reveal, they adapt to it within weeks. Sir, there's something else. The psychological evaluation reports from our surviving crews." Corthan reviewed the data with mounting horror. Confederation forces weren't just being defeated, they were being traumatized. Veterans who had served for decades were requesting transfers to non-combat positions. Some were refusing to engage human ships entirely. "They're breaking our military's will to fight," he realized. "This isn't just conquest. It's psychological warfare designed to destroy our capacity to resist." The communication system chimed with an urgent message from the Confederation Council. When the transmission activated, Corthan found himself looking at the worried faces of the most powerful beings in known space. "Admiral," The council speaker's voice was strained. "We need immediate recommendations. The situation is spiraling beyond our control." "The situation is already beyond our control," Corthan replied, bluntly. "We are no longer dealing with a primitive species that stumbled onto advanced technology. We are dealing with creatures who view warfare as an extension of evolution. Every battle makes them stronger. Every defeat teaches them something new." "What do you recommend?" Corthan was quiet for a long moment. "Negotiation." "Negotiation?" The council speaker's voice rose in disbelief. "With primitives!" "These are not primitives," Corthan said quietly. "These are predators. And—" Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Terra's Wrath, watching as the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled moved through hyperspace toward the Confederation capital system. Around her, the viewports showed an endless procession of ships, not just human vessels, but representatives from every species the Confederation had ever enslaved. The Krillian Empire had contributed their knowledge of Confederation shield technology. The Vegan Republic had provided detailed maps of the capital system's defenses. The Centauri Alliance had shared their expertise in energy weapons. Dozens of species, united for the first time in galactic history by a simple shared goal: freedom. "Admiral," reported Captain Martinez from the tactical station, "final fleet count is confirmed. 12,000 combat vessels, 4,000 support ships, and nearly 3 million liberated beings ready to reclaim their freedom." Chen nodded, still staring out at the fleet. 3 years ago, she had been President of the United States, dealing with budget disputes and trade negotiations. Now, she commanded the largest military force in galactic history, preparing to end a 10,000-year-old empire. The transformation hadn't been easy. Humanity had paid a terrible price for their rapid advancement. Entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but preparation for war. Earth's population had been mobilized into the largest industrial effort in human history. Personal freedoms had been suspended in favor of species survival, but it had worked. The creatures who had dismissed humanity as primitive mammals had created something they never imagined possible: a united, technologically advanced, militarily sophisticated species with a single-minded focus on their destruction. "Time to target?" 47 minutes until we reach the outer defenses of the Mortal system. The Confederation capital was protected by defensive installations that had been built over millennia. Energy shields that could deflect asteroid impacts. Weapons platforms capable of destroying entire fleets. Fortress stations manned by the elite of Confederation military forces. It would have been an impregnable defense against any known military force. But humanity had spent 3 years studying Confederation technology, tactics, and psychology. They knew exactly how to break defenses that had never been seriously tested. "Signal from the advanced scouts," reported the communications officer. "The Confederation Defense Fleet is taking position around the capital world. Estimated strength, 800 vessels, including their newest dreadnoughts. Response from High Command? Proceed as planned. Show them what they created." The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Mortal system in perfect formation. For a moment, both forces simply stared at each other across the void. The Confederation defenders saw an impossibly large fleet of vessels using their own technology. The human forces saw the heart of an empire that had considered them insects. Supreme Admiral Corthan stood on the bridge of the Confederation flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the sensor readings with a mixture of awe and terror. The human fleet was larger than anything in recorded history, but more disturbing was the composition of that fleet. "Analysis confirms our worst fears," reported his tactical officer. "Those ships are using our hull materials, our energy systems, our propulsion technology. But the engineering signatures indicate improvements we can't match." "How many species are represented in that fleet?" 47 confirmed, sir. "Every major civilization we've brought under Confederation control in the past 1,000 years." Corthan closed his eyes briefly. The Confederation's strategy of divide and conquer had been turned completely against them. Instead of keeping potential enemies separated, they had given humanity a galaxy full of allies who shared detailed knowledge of Confederation weaknesses. Incoming transmission from the human fleet. The main screen activated, showing Admiral Chen's calm, professional face. Behind her, the bridge of the Terra's Wrath buzzed with quiet activity. Human efficiency had become legendary throughout the galaxy. No wasted motion, no unnecessary communication, no emotion that didn't serve a tactical purpose. Supreme Admiral Corthon. Chen's voice was polite and formal. I am Admiral Sarah, Chen of the Human Liberation Fleet. We are here to discuss the terms of the Confederation's surrender. Surrender? Corthon's mandibles clicked involuntarily. We have never surrendered to anyone. The Confederation has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. The Confederation has oppressed this galaxy for 10,000 years, Chen corrected. That ends today. You cannot seriously believe you can defeat our entire military with a single battle. Chen's expression didn't change. Supreme Admiral, we're not here to defeat your military. We're here to liberate every enslaved being in, your territory and dismantle the systems that allowed your oppression to continue. Your military is simply in our way. The tactical displays on both ships showed the two fleets moving into engagement range. But instead of the chaotic rush that characterized most space battles, the human formation moved with mechanical precision. Each ship knew exactly where to be, when to fire, and how to support their allies. Admiral Chen, Corthon tried one final time. Surely we can negotiate. The Confederation is willing to discuss territorial adjustments, tribute payments, even limited autonomy for some species. The time for negotiation ended when you murdered 80,000 civilians, Chen replied. You taught us that the universe contains species who consider human life expendable. We've learned that lesson very well, the battle for the Confederation. Capital began with a demonstration that horrified every military strategist who witnessed it. The human fleet didn't charge the defensive positions or attempt to overwhelm them with superior numbers. Instead, they systematically dissected the Confederation defenses with surgical precision. Weapons platforms that had protected the capital for centuries were disabled by energy beams that penetrated their shields as if they didn't exist. Fortress stations were boarded and captured by assault teams that moved through their corridors like they had built-in blueprints. Defense fleet. Vessels found their own weapons turned against them as human cyber warfare specialists took control of their systems. This is impossible, whispered Corthon as he watched his impregnable defenses crumble. No species develops this quickly. No military force can coordinate on this scale. Sir, reported his aide, the humans are transmitting surrender terms to all remaining vessels. The terms were broadcast on all frequencies, in every language spoken by Confederation species. They were simple, non-negotiable, and completely unprecedented in galactic history. All enslaved beings will be immediately freed and provided with transportation to their home worlds or colonies of their choosing. All forced labor operations will cease permanently. All territorial expansion by force will end. The Confederation government will be dissolved and replaced by a voluntary alliance of species with equal representation. Any attempt to resist these terms will result in the complete destruction of Confederation military forces. They're not conquering us, Corthon realized with growing horror. They're dismantling us. The final battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Confederation fleet was completely destroyed, but something even more significant had occurred. The capital world's population, billions of beings from hundreds of species, had witnessed the systematic defeat of their supposed masters by the creatures they had been told were primitive animals. Admiral Chen stood in the Confederation Council chambers 3 days later, addressing the assembled representatives of every species in known space. The Grand Hall that had once symbolized Confederation dominance now hosted something unprecedented. A truly representative galactic government. The Galactic Liberation Alliance, she announced, will be founded on principles the Confederation never understood. voluntary membership, equal representation, mutual defense, and most importantly, the absolute right of every species to develop according to their own potential. And humanity's role in this alliance? Asked the former Confederation. Council Speaker, now stripped of authority but allowed to speak. Humanity will be one voice among many, Chen replied. We have no interest in ruling others. We've learned that forced control creates exactly the kind of resentment that destroyed your empire. But you have the largest fleet, the most advanced technology, which we will share freely with any species that requests it. The technological advancement that you tried to prevent will be available to everyone. No species will ever again be kept primitive for the convenience of others. As the council session continued, reports arrived from throughout the former Confederation territory. Slave worlds were declaring independence. Industrial systems were being converted from forced labor to free markets. Species that had been enemies for centuries were cooperating to rebuild their shattered civilizations. The transformation wasn't without problems. Some species struggled with sudden freedom after generations of oppression. Others had to learn how to govern themselves. A few attempted to establish their own mini-empires, only to discover that the human liberation fleet was as committed to preventing oppression as they had been to ending it. But the fundamental change was irreversible. The galaxy would never again accept the idea that one species could dominate all others. The communication chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with its usual mix of alien voices and electronic chatter. Councillor Vextai adjusted his translation device as another routine report scrolled across his screen. Trade disputes, border, negotiations, mining rights, the same boring paperwork that filled his days. Then the emergency beacon started screaming. The sharp, piercing sound cut through every conversation in the room. Vextai's 4 eyes widened as he saw the priority level flash red on his display. Emergency transmissions were rare. Emergency. Transmissions with this level of urgency were almost unheard of. All stations, we have a priority distress signal, announced the duty officer, her tentacles dancing across her control panel. Origin point is Sector 7G, Outer Rim territories. Vextai pulled up the sector map. The Outer Rim was mostly empty. Space, dotted with a few farming colonies and mining operations. Nothing important enough to cause this kind of alert. He opened the transmission file and began to listen. Static filled his headphones first, then a human voice broke through. The words were choppy and filled with panic. This is New Eden Colony. Under attack. They came out of nowhere. Our defenses are gone. They're landing troops. Please, anyone who receives this, we have civilians here, women and children. They're not soldiers. Please help us. The transmission cut to static, then resumed. They have some kind of energy weapons. Our shields are failing. Estimate maybe 2 hours before they break through our main compound. This is Marcus Webb, Colony Administrator. If anyone can hear this, we're sending our location data. Please. Another burst of static. Then, silence. Vextai leaned back in his chair. Humans. He remembered reading about them in his academy training. They had been involved in galactic affairs about a century ago, then suddenly disappeared, withdrew to their own space and cut off most contact with the Council. Some said they had given up on expansion. Others whispered they had found something better to do with their time. "Sir," called the duty officer, "we're having trouble with the location data. The signal contains some kind of encryption we don't recognize." Vextai frowned. "What kind of encryption?" "Unknown, sir. It's definitely not standard civilian emergency protocols. This is military-grade coding, but it's unlike anything in our databases." That was strange. The humans in the message sounded like farmers, not soldiers. Why would farmers have military encryption? "Run it through the historical archives," Vextai ordered. "Check everything we have on human communication systems." While the computers worked, Vextai listened to the message again. The humans sounded genuinely terrified. Whatever was happening on New Eden, it was real, but something about the transmission bothered him. The fear was real, but underneath it, there was something else, a kind of cold anger that made his scales prickle. "Sir, we have a match on the encryption," the duty officer called out. "But you're not going to like it." "What did you find?" "The code signature matches files from the Terran Defense Force, military communications from about 120 years ago." Vextai's blood went cold. The Terran Defense Force. Every student at the Galactic Academy learned about them, usually in classes titled Conflicts to Avoid at All Costs. The humans had been different back then. Aggressive, expansionist. Their military had carved through 3 different alien invasions like they were nothing. Then, suddenly, they had just stopped, pulled back to their own territory, disbanded their fleets. Or so everyone thought. "Are you sure about this match?" Vextai asked. 97% certainty, sir. The coding structure is identical to TDF emergency protocols." Vextai stared at the transmission data. If these were just farmers, why did they have TDF encryption? Unless they weren't just farmers, unless the humans had never really withdrawn from the galaxy, unless they had simply learned to hide better. "Sir, we're receiving additional signals," the duty officer reported, her voice tense. "Automated responses to the distress call. They're coming from everywhere." "What do you mean, everywhere?" "I mean exactly that, sir. Deep space monitoring stations that aren't on any of our charts. Stations that have been dark for decades are suddenly coming online, and they're all responding to that encryption signature." On the main display, tiny dots of light began appearing across the galaxy map. Each dot represented a signal source that had just activated. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all hidden in asteroid fields, nebulae, and empty space, where no one thought to look. "Get me a direct line to Council Command," Vextai ordered, his voice shaking slightly. "Priority Alpha." As the connection established, Vextai watched more lights appear on the map. Whatever the humans had built during their century of isolation, it was vast, and it had all just woken up because of one distress call from a farming colony. The face of High Counselor Zephron appeared on his screen, the elderly alien's expression annoyed at being disturbed. "This better be important, Vextai." "Sir, we've received a distress call from human colonists under attack, but there's something else. The signal has triggered responses from hidden installations across the galaxy, hundreds of them, maybe thousands." Zephran's annoyed expression quickly changed to concern. "Human installations? That's impossible. Our intelligence reports show they dismantled their military infrastructure decades ago." "Sir, I don't think they dismantled anything. I think they just hid it better." The High Counselor was quiet for a long moment, staring at the galaxy map that showed more and more signal sources coming online every minute. "What's the status of the colony under attack?" he finally asked. "Unknown, sir. We lost contact 20 minutes ago. But based on the message, they estimated 2 hours before their defenses failed completely." "And these hidden stations?" "They're all transmitting on the same frequency now, sir. Encrypted military communications. We can't break the code, but the traffic volume is enormous. It's like they're coordinating something." Zephron closed his eyes. "Contact the hegemony forces in that sector. Tell them to cease their attack immediately and withdraw." "Sir, the hegemony doesn't recognize council authority and—" "Contact them now!" Zephran roared. "Tell them they're about to start a war they can't win. Tell them they've just poked a sleeping monster. Tell them whatever you have to, but make them stop." The transmission ended, leaving Vextai staring at his screen. On the galaxy map, new signals were appearing every few seconds. The humans hadn't withdrawn from galactic affairs. They had been watching, waiting, building, and now something had threatened their people. Vexte thought about the stories from the old wars, stories of human ships that moved faster than physics should allow, of weapons that could crack planets, of soldiers who fought like demons and never ever gave up. He looked at the transmission, time-stamp from New Eden. The attack had started 3 hours ago. If the humans were coming, they would already be on their way. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, something ancient and terrible was stirring, and it was heading for the front. Lines of a war that the galaxy wasn't ready to fight. Deep in the asteroid belt of the Sol system, something that had been sleeping for 80 years began to wake up. The Cerberus station looked like just another piece of space rock from the outside. Its surface was pitted and scarred, covered with the kind of cosmic dust that made it invisible to most sensors. But inside its metal heart, lights were coming on for the first time in decades. Admiral Sarah Chen felt the vibration through the deck plates as the station's main reactor came online. She had been expecting this moment her entire life, trained for it since childhood. But now that it was here, she felt a cold knot in her stomach. "Admiral, we're receiving the activation codes now," reported Lieutenant Torres from his position at the communications console. "Authentication confirmed. This is not a drill." Sarah nodded and walked to the center of the command deck. Around her, officers who had been living normal civilian lives just hours ago were taking their positions at stations they knew by heart but had never used in anger. The Terran Defense Force had never really disbanded after the last galactic war. It had simply gone to sleep. "Status report," she ordered. "Reactor at full power," called out Commander Martinez from engineering. "All systems green across the board." "Communications array is online," Torres added. "We're in contact with all primary and secondary command nodes. And the fleet? Shipyard 7 reports first wave vessels will be ready for deployment in 6 hours. Shipyard 12 estimates 8 hours for their capital ships." Sarah walked to the main display screen and watched as status reports came in from across human space. Hidden shipyards built inside asteroids and moons were bringing massive vessels online. Weapons platforms disguised as space debris were charging their main guns. And everywhere, people who had been teachers, farmers, engineers, and shopkeepers were remembering their other job, the job they had trained for but hoped they would never need. "Ma'am, incoming priority message from New Eden," Torres announced. It's bad." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was different from the first distress call. Younger, more desperate. "This is Jenny Webb. My father sent the first message. The compound has fallen. They have us trapped in the emergency bunkers. They're using some kind of gas to try to force us out. There are children down here. Please, if anyone is coming, hurry." The message dissolved into static. Sarah opened her eyes and saw her bridge crew staring at her. These were good people. People who had given up normal lives to serve as guardians for the human colonies scattered across the galaxy. People who understood that sometimes the price of peace was being ready for war. "Torres, get me a connection to Fleet Command," she said quietly. "Aye, ma'am." The holographic display flickered to life, showing the face of Admiral Jackson Reed. Sarah had served under him during the last war back when she was just a lieutenant. Now he was the supreme commander of forces that most of the galaxy thought no longer existed. "Sarah," he said without preamble, "I assume you've heard the New Eden transmission." "Yes, sir. What's our response authorization?" "Full deployment. Everything we've got. The hegemony just declared war on humanity. They just don't know it yet." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Full deployment meant revealing everything they had built during their decades of hiding. It meant showing the galaxy that humanity had not been sleeping peacefully in their corner of space. "Sir, that will expose our entire defensive network." "Good," Reed said grimly. "It's time the galaxy remembered why they should leave human colonies alone. How long until your task force is ready?" "First wave in 6 hours. Full deployment in E12. Too long. Those people don't have 12 hours. Sarah looked at her tactical display. Sir, we do have the rapid response units. Reed raised an eyebrow. The Phantoms? Sarah? We've never used them in actual combat, but we've tested them extensively. They can reach New Eden in 4 hours. The Phantom ships were humanity's newest and most secret weapons. Vessels that could slip between dimensions, moving faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were small, carrying only a few dozen crew members each, but they were equipped with weapons that could level cities. Authorized, Reed said after a moment. But Sarah, if you deploy the Phantoms, there's no going back. The galaxy will know we have technology they can't understand. Sir, there are children in those bunkers. Reed smiled grimly. That's what I wanted to hear. Execute Operation Righteous Fury. Show them what happens when someone threatens civilians. The connection ended, and Sarah turned to her crew. They were all looking at her with expressions of grim determination. These people had families of their own scattered across human space. They understood what was at stake. All stations, this is Admiral Chen, she announced over the ship-wide communications system. We are implementing full war protocols. This is not a drill. As of this moment, humanity is at war with the hegemony forces that have attacked New Eden Colony. She paused, thinking of the children hiding in those bunkers. Our mission is simple. We protect our own. We bring our people home, and we make sure this never happens again. Around the bridge, officers began working with the smooth efficiency of people who had drilled for this moment their entire careers. Sarah walked to the tactical display and began selecting targets. Commander Martinez, bring the Phantom Squadron. Online. Aye, ma'am. How many ships? Sarah thought about the panicked voice of Jenny Webb, about children hiding in underground bunkers while alien soldiers tried to gas them out. All of them. Martinez whistled softly. Ma'am, that's overkill for one hegemony raiding force. Commander, when someone attacks human civilians, there is no such thing as overkill. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the soft beeping of status indicators. On the main screen, Sarah watched as hidden facilities across human space came online. Weapons that had been sleeping in the dark were powering up. Ships that existed only in classified files were preparing for launch. The hegemony had made a simple mistake. They had assumed that because humans were peaceful, they were weak. They had forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who fought only when they had no choice. Admiral, Phantom Squadron reports ready for deployment, Torres announced. Launch when ready, Sarah ordered, and send a message on all hegemony military frequencies. What should it say, ma'am? Sarah thought for a moment. Tell them they have 1 hour to withdraw from New Eden and release all human civilians unharmed. After that, we consider them enemy combatants to be dealt with accordingly. And if they don't respond? Sarah looked at the tactical display showing the Phantom ships beginning their impossible journey through folded space. Then they're about to learn why humanity spent a century building weapons instead of making friends. Commander Thekvar of the Hegemony War Fleet stared at the message that had just appeared on his command screen. He read it twice, then called his intelligence officer over. What do you make of this? He asked, pointing at the human transmission. Intelligence Officer Grixtall examined the message with his compound eyes. It appears to be some kind of joke, sir. The humans haven't had a military presence in this sector for decades, and yet they're giving us ultimatums. Sir, our intelligence reports show that human military capability is minimal. They have a few patrol ships, some outdated defense platforms, nothing that could threaten a hegemony battle group. Thekvar looked out at his fleet. 12 heavy cruisers, 30 destroyers, and enough ground troops to occupy a dozen planets. The New Eden colony had fallen in less than 2 hours. Any rescue force the humans could send would be swept away like dust. Signal the fleet, he ordered. Ignore the human transmission. Continue operations as planned. What Thekvar didn't know was that his communications were being monitored by sensors he couldn't detect. Sensors that had been watching hegemony movements for months, waiting for exactly this kind of mistake. 50 light-years away, Captain. Elena Vasquez received the intelligence report aboard her phantom ship, the Shadow Strike. Around her, the bridge crew worked in the dim red lighting that gave their vessels their name. Everything about the phantom ships was designed to be invisible, from their hull materials that bent light around them to their engines that left no energy signature. "Captain, we've just received confirmation," reported her tactical officer. "The hegemony commander has refused our ultimatum." Elena nodded. She had expected as much. The hegemony had grown arrogant over the past century, used to bullying smaller civilizations without consequences. They had forgotten that humans were different. "Time to target?" she asked. 3 hours, 15 minutes, and the rest of the squadron? "All ships report ready. We'll arrive in perfect formation." Elena looked at the tactical display showing the positions of her 12 ships. Each phantom vessel carried enough firepower to level a city, but that wasn't what made them special. What made them special was that they could appear anywhere, anytime, without warning. "Lieutenant Chen, patch me through to Admiral Chen on Cerberus Station." The holographic display flickered to life, showing the Admiral's calm face. Elena had served under Admiral Chen during the war games that tested the Phantom technology. She was the best tactical mind in the human fleet. "Captain Vasquez, status report." "We'll be in position in just over 3 hours, ma'am. The hegemony has refused to withdraw." "Understood. What's your tactical assessment?" Elena called up the enemy fleet disposition on her screen. 12 heavy cruisers in standard formation around the planet. They're not expecting any serious opposition. Their shields are down, their weapons are in standby mode. And the ground forces? Approximately 2,000 troops. They've secured the main colony, but our people are still holding out in the emergency bunkers. The hegemony is trying to force them out with gas attacks. Admiral Chen's expression hardened. "Casualties?" "Unknown, ma'am. We lost contact with the surface 30 minutes ago." Elena watched the Admiral consider the tactical situation. Around them, the laws of physics bent as the phantom ships traveled through folded space at speeds that should have been impossible. Human engineers had spent decades figuring out how to break the rules that limited other species. "Captain, you are authorized to use whatever force necessary to secure the safety of human civilians. Show them what our technology can do." "Understood, ma'am. What about prisoners?" "Any hegemony forces that surrender immediately will be treated according to galactic law. Any that continue to threaten civilians..." Admiral Chen paused. "Use your best judgment." The connection ended, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. She had trained for this mission her entire career, but she had never expected it to actually happen. The phantom ships were humanity's greatest secret, vessels that represented a century of focused research and development. "Captain, incoming. Message from the surface," her communications officer announced. "It's weak, but we're picking up a transmission from the emergency bunkers." "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was barely a whisper, probably someone speaking directly into a short-range communicator. "This is Marcus Webb. If anyone is receiving this, they've breached the outer bunker door. We're falling back to the inner chambers. Estimate maybe 1 hour before they break through. We have 43 civilians down here, including 12 children." The transmission cut off. Elena felt her jaw clench. 12 children. She thought of her own daughter back on Earth, safe in her school, never having to worry about alien soldiers breaking down her door. "All ships, this is Shadow Strike," she broadcast to her squadron. "New tactical priority. We have children in immediate danger. When we arrive, primary targets are any hegemony forces near the bunker complex." "Acknowledged. Shadow Strike," came the reply from the other ships. Elena could hear the same cold anger in their voices that she felt in her own chest. The Phantom. Ships continued their impossible journey through folded space. Around them, the universe twisted and bent as human technology did things that alien scientists said were impossible. When they emerged, they would bring with them weapons that redefined what warfare meant. Captain, we're picking up more intelligence from our deep space monitoring network, her intelligence officer reported. The hegemony is moving additional forces toward human space. This isn't just a raid. They're planning something bigger. Elena studied the tactical reports flowing in from hidden sensors throughout the galaxy. The hegemony had been building up forces for months, preparing for what looked like a major offensive against human colonies. "Get this information to Admiral Chen immediately," she ordered. "If they want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget." She looked at the countdown timer showing their arrival at New Eden. 2 hours and 47 minutes. 47 minutes for children to hide in underground bunkers while alien soldiers tried to kill them. Elena thought about the decades humans had spent preparing for this moment. The weapons they had built, the ships they had hidden, the technology they had developed in secret while the galaxy assumed they were weak and peaceful. The hegemony was about to learn the difference between being peaceful and being harmless. "All stations, prepare for combat deployment," Elena announced. "In less than 3 hours, we're going to show them what happens when someone threatens human children." Around her, the bridge crew worked with deadly efficiency. These were people who had given up normal lives to serve as humanity's hidden guardians. They understood that sometimes the price of protecting the innocent was becoming something terrible yourself. The Phantom ships raced through folded space toward New Eden, carrying with them the full fury of a species that had learned to fight wars among the stars. The Phantom ships arrived at New Eden without fanfare or warning. One moment, the space around the planet was empty except for the hegemony fleet. The next moment, 12 impossible vessels materialized out of folded space like ghosts, becoming solid. Commander Thekvar was reviewing casualty reports when his sensor officer started screaming, "Sir, unknown contacts! 12 ships just appeared at point-blank range." Thekvar spun around to look at his tactical display. Where there had been empty space seconds before, 12 sleek black ships now hung motionless. They were unlike anything in his database, smooth, almost organic-looking hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Identification?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. They're not broadcasting any signals. They're just sitting there." "Weapons status?" "I can't get a reading on their armament, sir. Our sensors are showing conflicting data." Thekvar felt his first stirring of unease. Ships didn't just appear out of nowhere, and ships that could block hegemony sensors were not something his intelligence briefings had prepared him for. "Signal the fleet. Battle stations. Target those unknown vessels." As his fleet began to respond, Thekvar watched the mysterious ships on his display. They were smaller than his cruisers, but something about them made his scales itch. They hung, in space with the patient stillness of predators. Then they moved. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for the next 1,000 years, always with the same sense of awe and terror. The human ships didn't attack like normal vessels. They didn't launch missiles or fire energy beams. Instead, they seemed to flicker in and out of existence, appearing next to hegemony vessels for just long enough to deliver devastating strikes, then vanishing before return fire could reach them. Captain. Elena Vasquez watched the battle from the bridge of Shadow Strike as her ships tore through the enemy fleet with surgical precision. The Phantom vessels could phase in and out of normal space, making them effectively untouchable by conventional weapons. "Target the command ship," she ordered. "Disable engines and weapons, but keep life support intact. We want prisoners." "Acknowledged," her weapons officer replied. "Quantum torpedoes armed." The Shadow Strike flickered into existence directly, above the hegemony flagship. For 3 seconds, it existed in normal space long enough to fire 2 precisely aimed shots. The quantum torpedoes passed through the enemy ship's shields like they weren't there, detonating inside the engine room and weapons control. Then the shadow strike vanished again, leaving the enemy flagship dead in space. Around the fleet, the other Phantom ships were executing similar attacks. Hegemony vessels found themselves crippled before they could even return fire. It wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration of technological superiority that bordered on the supernatural. "This is Captain Vasquez of the Terran Defense Force, Elena, broadcast on all Hegemony frequencies. You have attacked human civilians. Your fleet is now disabled. Order your ground forces to withdraw immediately, or we will consider this a declaration of war against humanity." On the flagship, Commander Thekvar stared at his dead control panels in shock. His entire fleet had been neutralized in less than 10 minutes by vessels that shouldn't exist. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving surrender requests from 8 of our ships. The others aren't responding. Their communications arrays have been destroyed." Thekvar looked at his tactical display. Every one of his vessels was showing red damage indicators. Not destroyed, disabled. Someone had systematically taken apart his entire fleet with the precision of a surgeon. "Sir, what are your orders regarding the ground forces?" Thekvar thought about the 2,000 troops he had landed on New Eden. They were equipped with standard hegemony weapons and armor. If these human ships could do this to his fleet, what would they do to ground forces? "Signal all surface units," he said quietly. "Immediate withdrawal to the transport ships. Sir, what about the human prisoners? Release them. All of them. Now!" The communications officer looked confused, but began transmitting the orders. Thekvar continued to stare at the tactical display showing the impossible human ships. He had heard stories about human military technology from the old wars, but he had assumed they were exaggerated. Apparently not. On the surface of New Eden, hegemony ground troops received their withdrawal orders with confusion and relief. The human colonists had been harder to subdue than expected, and several units had taken casualties from improvised defenses. Major Krextal looked at his orders with disbelief. "Withdraw? We just got here." "Orders are orders," his sergeant replied. "Fleet Command wants everyone back on the transports immediately. What about the prisoners? Release them. All of them." As the hegemony troops began their withdrawal, the emergency bunkers of New Eden slowly opened. 43 human civilians emerged into daylight, blinking and afraid but alive. Marcus Webb was the first to see the strange black ships hanging in orbit above their world. They were beautiful in a deadly way, like sharks made of shadow and starlight. "Jenny," he called to his daughter, "are you getting this on the communicator?" Jenny Webb activated their emergency transmitter with shaking hands. "This is New Eden Colony. We're okay. The hegemony forces are withdrawing. There are ships in orbit, but we don't know who they are." The response came immediately, in a calm female voice with a slight accent. "New Eden Colony, this is Captain Vasquez of the Terran Defense Force. You are safe. Medical and relief ships are en route. The threat to your colony has been neutralized." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. The Terran Defense Force. He had heard stories from his grandfather about the legendary human military, stories he had assumed were myths. "Captain," he transmitted back, "thank you. How did you get here so fast?" There was a pause before the response came. "Mr. Webb, humanity has been watching over its colonies for a very long time. We've just been doing it quietly. In orbit, the Phantom ships maintained their positions as hegemony transports lifted off from the planet's surface." Elena watched the evacuation with grim satisfaction. Every enemy soldier was leaving. Every human civilian was safe. "Captain," her intelligence officer reported, "we're intercepting hegemony military communications. They're requesting emergency reinforcements. It looks like they're planning a counterattack." Elena smiled coldly. Let them come. Admiral Chen will want to give them a proper demonstration of human hospitality. She looked at the tactical display showing the disabled hegemony fleet. These ships would be returned to their government along with a message that would make it very clear what happened to anyone who threatened human civilians. Signal. Admiral Chen, she ordered. Mission accomplished. New Eden is secure. And I think it's time to show the galaxy what we've been building while they thought we were sleeping. The phantom ships began to fade from normal space, becoming invisible once again. But their message had been delivered with devastating clarity. Humanity was back, and they were no longer interested in being ignored. 3 weeks after the New Eden incident, Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the assembled Galactic Council in their great chamber on Nexus Prime. The curved walls rose high above her, filled with the representatives of hundreds of species, all staring, down at the human who had just changed everything. High Counselor Zephron looked older than when she had last seen him, his scales dulled with stress. The hegemony incident had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Every government was reassessing their intelligence reports on humanity. Admiral Chen, Zephron began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, the Council has asked you here to explain the events at New Eden Colony. Specifically, the appearance of human military vessels that our sensors could not detect. Sarah looked up at the gallery of alien faces. Some showed curiosity, others fear, and a few showed what might have been respect. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt the weight of representing her entire species. Honorable Counselors, she began, her voice clear and steady, humanity has never hidden our military capabilities. We simply chose not to display them unnecessarily. A ripple of whispers went through the chamber. Counselor Vextai leaned forward in his seat. Admiral, our intelligence services reported that humanity had dismantled its military forces after the last war. Are you saying our intelligence was wrong? Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Counselor, your intelligence services saw exactly what we wanted them to see. Humanity learned long ago that the best way to avoid war is to be so, prepared for it that no one wants to start one. She activated a holographic display that showed the positions of monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. Thousands of tiny lights appeared, each representing a human outpost that had been hidden for decades. For the past century, humanity has been watching, learning, preparing. We have monitoring stations in every sector, shipyards hidden in asteroid fields, and response fleets ready to deploy at a moment's notice. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Several counselors were frantically consulting with their aides, trying to understand how their governments had missed such a massive military buildup. The question before this council, Sarah continued, is what happens next. The hegemony attacked human civilians. They have since issued demands for the return of their captured fleet and threatened retaliation against human colonies. High Counselor Zephron raised a hand for silence. Admiral, the hegemony claims their attack on New Eden was a misunderstanding. They were pursuing pirates who had raided their territory. Sarah's expression hardened. With respect, High Counselor, the hegemony invaded a peaceful farming colony and attempted to gas children hiding in emergency bunkers. There was no misunderstanding. She activated another display showing footage from New Eden's security cameras. The council watched in uncomfortable silence as hegemony troops systematically destroyed civilian infrastructure and fired on unarmed colonists. Humanity has always believed in proportional response, Sarah said as the footage ended. But we also believe in absolute protection of our civilians. Counselor Vextai stood up. Admiral, what exactly is humanity proposing? Sarah looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of worlds. These people represented civilizations that had grown soft during the long peace, unused to the realities of warfare. we propose a new understanding. Humanity will continue to monitor galactic events from our hidden stations. We will continue to maintain our defensive capabilities, and we will respond immediately and decisively to any threat against human civilians or our allies. And if the hegemony refuses to accept this? Sarah's smile was cold as winter starlight. Then they will discover what a real war with humanity looks like. The holographic display changed to show the current disposition of human military forces. Battle fleets that had been hidden for decades were now visible on sensors throughout the galaxy. Massive construction shipyards were building vessels that dwarfed anything the Council had ever seen. The forces that responded to New Eden represented less than 1% of humanity's total military capability, Sarah explained calmly. We have been preparing for war for a century. We hope never to use these preparations, but we will not hesitate if our people are threatened. A hegemony representative stood up in the gallery, his voice shaking with anger. This is outrageous! Humanity cannot simply dictate terms to the rest of the galaxy? Sarah turned to look at him directly. Representative, 3 weeks ago your military attacked a farming colony and tried to murder children. Today, your government is demanding the return of ships that were used in that attack. I think humanity has been quite reasonable in our response. She activated one final display, showing a recording from the battle at New Eden. The Council watched as phantom ships materialized out of nothing and systematically disabled an entire hegemony fleet without destroying a single vessel. Humanity could have destroyed every ship in that fleet, Sarah said quietly. We chose not to. We could have retaliated against hegemony worlds. We chose not to. We could have begun systematic strikes against hegemony military installations. We chose not to. The chamber was completely silent now. But understand this, Sarah continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. Our restraint should not be mistaken for weakness. If the hegemony or any other power chooses to continue threatening human civilians, they will discover that humanity can be far less charitable than we have been. High Counselor Zephron was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical displays, showing human military strength. Admiral Chen, what assurance can you give the Council that humanity will not use its military superiority to dominate other species? Sarah thought of the children who had been hiding in the bunkers of New Eden. She thought of the farmers and teachers and engineers who had been forced to take up arms to defend their homes. She thought of the human colonies scattered across the galaxy, peaceful people who just wanted to live their lives without fear. High Counselor, humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We are farmers and scientists and artists who happen to be very good at building weapons when we need to. All we want is for our people to be safe. She paused, looking around the chamber one more time. But we will not allow anyone to threaten that safety. Ever. The council session ended with a vote to formally censure the hegemony and establish new protocols for protecting civilian colonies. The hegemony representative stormed out, promising that his government would not accept human demands. As Sarah left the chamber, Counselor Vexatai approached her. Admiral, do you really think the hegemony will back down? Sarah looked out through the great windows of Nexus Prime at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, hidden monitoring stations were tracking every ship movement in the galaxy. Weapons platforms disguised as asteroids were calculating firing solutions, and the crews of vessels that shouldn't exist were waiting for orders. Counselor, I hope they will, for their sake. She walked away, leaving Vextai staring out at the stars and wondering what other secrets humanity had hidden in the darkness between worlds. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson at New Eden. Humanity was not the peaceful, withdrawn species they had appeared to be. They were guardians who had been watching from the shadows, waiting for the moment when someone would be foolish enough to threaten their people. That moment had come and gone. Now everyone knew the price of making such a mistake. In the depths of space, The hidden monitoring stations continued their eternal watch, staffed by humans who had chosen exile to serve as early warning systems for their species. They were the first line of defense for a civilization that valued peace above all things. But they were also the guardians of a war machine that could reshape the galaxy if it was ever fully awakened. The message was clear to anyone with the wisdom to understand it. Humanity would protect its own, no matter the cost. And they had spent a century making sure they could do exactly that. The sleeping giant was awake now, and it was watching,